My parents discarded me like trash for 10 years, ignoring my existence while I survived on expired bread. Yet the moment my face graced the cover of Forbes as the youngest self-made female billionaire, my phone vibrated with the most sickeningly sweet voicemail of my life. Now, standing behind these heavy oak doors, I am ready to show them the true cost of trading my life for numbers in a bank account. My name is Harper Sterling. I am 32 years old, the founder and CEO of Origin, and right now I am supposed to be in a vegetative state. Instead, I am standing outside the executive boardroom of my Seattle headquarters, vibrating with a rage so potent it feels like it could peel the paint from the walls. The hallway is quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside my chest. The air conditioning hums at a steady frequency, chilling the sweat on my forehead, but my skin feels hot, feverish with the anticipation of violence. Through the thick oak doors, I can hear them. The voices are muffled, yet they slice through me with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Richard, Linda, Bella, my family. The people who did not call me for a decade are now sitting in my leather chairs, drinking my coffee, and deciding how to dismantle my life's work. I press my ear closer to the wood, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my side. The car accident had left me with 3 broken ribs and a fractured tibia, and every breath was a labor. Weeks ago, I lay in a hospital bed, locked inside a paralyzed body, unable to blink or scream while they stood over me and discussed my prognosis with the detachment of estate agents appraising a tear-down property. I had felt helpless then, a prisoner in my own mind, but standing here, upright and conscious, that helplessness has calcified into a cold, hard resolve. "You are rushing this, Richard," Marcus Thorne said. His voice was deep and steady, the only anchor of sanity in that room. Marcus was my attorney, my mentor, and perhaps the only person in this building who actually viewed me as a human being rather than an ATM. Origin is not a distressed asset. We are on the verge of a breakthrough in synthetic tissue regeneration. Selling to competitors now, at this valuation, is criminal negligence. I am the legal guardian here. Thorne, not you. My father snapped back. I could picture his face, flushed red, the vein in his neck bulging as it always did when his authority was challenged. The doctors were clear. Harper has suffered catastrophic brain damage. She is permanently incapacitated. She is never walking through that door again. Hearing him pronounce my professional death sentence with such confidence made my jaw clench tight enough to crack a tooth. He sounded relieved. Richard is right. My mother, Linda, chimed in. Her voice trembled, a masterful affectation of sorrow that she had perfected over years of emotional manipulation. We have to think about her long-term care. Marcus, do you know how much a private facility costs? Selling the company is the only way to ensure our darling Harper gets the treatment she deserves. We are doing this for her. The audacity of her lie nearly made me retch. She did not want to pay for my care. She wanted to fund her retirement in Florida. "Oh, stop the weeping. Mom, he is not buying it," Bella cut in. My younger sister sounded bored, likely scrolling through her phone while deciding the fate of a billion-dollar enterprise. "Look, Marcus, we have a cash offer on the table that expires in 48 hours. We want to liquidate. We are the decision makers now. Just hand over the pen so we can get our money and get out of this rain-soaked city." There it was, the naked truth. They were vultures picking at a carcass before the heart had even stopped beating. I looked down at my hand. It was resting on the brushed steel handle of the boardroom door. The metal was cool, solid, and real. For 10 years, I had craved their validation. I had worked myself to the bone to be someone they could not ignore, and I had succeeded. They were certainly paying attention to me now, or at least to the fortune I had amassed. I tightened my grip on the handle. The physical pain in my leg was grounding, a reminder that I was alive, that I was dangerous, and that I was about to ruin their day in the most spectacular way possible. I took one last deep breath, filling my lungs with the sterile office air, and prepared to introduce my family to the consequences of their greed. Before I pushed that handle down, my mind drifted backward, pulled by the gravity of a decade-old wound. 10 years ago, the door to my childhood home had slammed shut in my face with a finality that echoed in my nightmares for months. Richard had thrown my suitcase onto the porch, telling me that if I wanted to waste my life on computer codes instead of attending law school, I could do it without a single cent of his money. I was 22 years old, terrified, and completely alone. I moved into a studio apartment in the worst part of town where the walls smelled of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. For 3 years, I lived on instant noodles that cost 20 cents a pack. I learned to ignore the hunger pangs that gnawed at my stomach because every dollar I saved went into server costs and electricity. I sat in a secondhand office chair for 20 hours a day, typing until my fingers cramped and my vision blurred, building the foundational algorithms for Aura in one line of code at a time. My only companions were the hum of my hard drive and the sirens wailing outside my window. While I was taping cardboard over my drafty windows to keep the heating bill down, Bella was touring Europe on Richard's credit card. I saw the photos on social media: Bella sipping champagne in Paris, Bella sunbathing on a yacht in the Mediterranean, Bella smiling with our parents at her graduation, a brand new convertible with a red bow waiting in the driveway. They funded her lifestyle without question, rewarding her mediocrity simply because she was compliant. I was the difficult one, the black sheep, the investment that had failed to yield a return. There were moments of weakness when I reached out. One winter, when I came down with pneumonia and could not afford antibiotics. I called home, Linda answered. I barely got the words out before she cut me off with a voice devoid of warmth. She told me that I had made my bed, and now I had to sleep in it. She said that struggle builds character, as if freezing in an unheated apartment was a lesson in morality rather than cruelty. That was the last time I asked them for anything. Then, everything changed. The algorithm worked. Aura cracked the code on synthetic tissue replication, and practically overnight. I went from a starving recluse to the most watched CEO in Silicon Valley. The money followed the fame. I moved from that roach-infested studio to a sprawling modernist villa overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I drove cars that cost more than my parents' house. I wore suits tailored in Milan. Yet, inside that glass castle, the silence was deafening. I had employees, admirers, and business partners. But I had no one who knew me before I was a brand name. It is pathetic to admit. But despite everything, a small, fractured part of me still craved their approval. I wanted Richard to look at my quarterly reports and nod in respect. I wanted Linda to brag about me to her bridge club. That desire for validation was a flaw in my source code, a vulnerability I had never managed to patch. That vulnerability is exactly what they exploited. 2 months ago, Forbes magazine named me one of the wealthiest women under 40. They put my face on the cover with the headline declaring me the new tech queen. The article detailed my net worth, estimating it in the low billions. The magazine hit the newsstands on a Tuesday morning. I remember staring at my own face on the glossy paper, feeling a strange mix of pride and isolation. At exactly 10 in the morning, my personal cell phone rang. I looked at the screen and froze. It was a number I had not seen in 10 years. Richard was calling. They had ignored me when I was hungry. They had ignored me when I was sick. They had ignored me when I was building an empire from nothing. But the moment the world stamped a billion-dollar price tag on my head, they remembered they had a daughter. I answered the phone, and my mother's voice poured into my ear like warm honey, thick with artificial sweetness. Linda did not apologize for the decade of silence. She did not explain why my birthday cards had been returned unopened for 10 years. Instead, she rewrote history with a breathtaking audacity. "We always knew you were our greatest pride. Harper," she said, her voice trembling with a practiced emotion that could have won an Academy Award. "We only wanted to test you, to make you strong enough to conquer the world. And look at you now. It worked." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. A rational person would have hung up. A CEO who negotiated million-dollar contracts would have recognized the manipulation instantly. But in that moment, I was not a businesswoman. I was a daughter who had been starving for affection for a third of her life. I wanted to believe the lie. I wanted to believe that their cruelty had a noble purpose. So, I let them in. The reunion dinner was a spectacle of excess, entirely funded by my Black American Express card. We dined at the most exclusive steakhouse in Seattle. Richard ordered a bottle of vintage red wine that cost $4,000, swirling it in his glass with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was entitled to the best. Linda played the role of the doting mother perfectly, fussing over my hair and squeezing my hand across the table. Bella sat across from me, smiling a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. The request began before the dessert wine was even poured. Bella, whose resume was a patchwork of failed internships and gap years, decided she was perfectly suited for a senior executive role at Aura Gen. She needed a new wardrobe to look the part, of course, and perhaps a luxury apartment closer to my office to minimize her commute. I gave her everything. I wrote checks without glancing at the zeros, convincing myself that I was simply making up for lost time. I was blind to the red flags that were waving right in front of my face. I ignored the way Bella stared at my diamond watch with a hunger that looked less like admiration and more like theft. I brushed off Richard's probing questions about my estate planning. One evening, over brandy in my library, he leaned in with feigned concern. "You travel so much, Harper," he said. "Do you have a current will in place who handles your medical decisions if you are incapacitated? It is just responsible business." "Sweetheart." I thought he was being protective. I thought he finally cared. I was a fool. When I announced that I needed to travel to a remote facility in the Colorado Rockies to oversee the final field tests for our new biogel, they insisted on tagging along. Linda clapped her hands together and declared it the perfect opportunity for a family retreat. She painted a picture of hot cocoa by the fireplace and bonding games in a cozy cabin. I agreed. I was desperate to solidify this fragile new connection. The reality was a nightmare on a winding mountain pass. It was shortly after midnight, and a violent storm was battering the windshield of my SUV. I was behind the wheel, navigating the treacherous hairpin turns with extreme caution, while my family slept soundly in the heated leather seats behind me. As we approached a steep decline, I tapped the brakes to slow down for a sharp curve. The pedal sank all the way to the floor with zero resistance. Panic surged through my veins as I pumped the pedal again. Nothing. The car accelerated, gaining speed with every second. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, screaming as the heavy vehicle careened through the metal guardrail and launched into the dark void below. In that split second before impact, as gravity took hold, a chilling realization hit me harder than the ground ever could. My car had been serviced 2 days ago. Brakes do not just fail on their own. The world dissolved into a cacophony of screeching metal and shattering glass. The SUV tumbled down the mountainside, rolling 3 times before slamming into a jagged outcrop of rock. The front of the vehicle, where I sat, crumpled like a tin can, crushing my legs and slamming my chest against the steering column. The last thing I heard was the terrifying silence that follows chaos, broken only by the whimpering of my family in the back seat, who were shielded by the reinforced chassis and side airbags. Then, the lights went out completely. I drifted in a shoreless ocean of darkness for what felt like an eternity. Time lost its meaning. Occasionally, sounds would pierce the veil, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum, a doctor's voice, grave and distant, explaining that the trauma to my frontal lobe was extensive. He used words like persistent vegetative state and unlikely to recover. He was telling my parents that I was gone, that the Harper they knew had been erased from existence. But I was not gone. I was trapped. My consciousness clawed its way back to the surface, but my body refused to answer the command. I tried to open my eyes, but my lids felt like they were welded shut with lead. I tried to twitch a finger, to moan, to signal that I was still in here, but nothing moved. I was a prisoner within my own skin, fully aware of every sound and sensation, but completely invisible to the world outside. I could feel the scratchy hospital sheets and the tube down my throat, but I could not lift a finger to save myself. The reaction from my family was instant and horrifying. There was no weeping. There were no prayers for a miracle. As soon as the doctor left the room, the atmosphere shifted from a hospital room to an auction house. "So she is a vegetable," Bella said. Her voice was not sad, it was calculating. "Does this mean the inheritance process starts now? I cannot wait 6 months for probate court to clear the funds for that villa in St. Bart's. I already put a deposit down." I heard the distinct zip of my designer handbag being torn open. "Keep your voice down," Linda hissed, though she sounded more annoyed than grieving. "Help me find her keychain. The fob for the master safe at the house has to be here, and we need her phone. Did anyone see her unlock pattern before the crash?" My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. But on the monitor, it likely just registered as a slight elevation in pulse. I was screaming at them in my mind, begging them to stop, to hold my hand, to love me. But they were too busy stripping my corpse while it was still warm. The realization hit me with the force of the crash itself. They did not care if I lived or died. In fact, my survival was an inconvenience. A new voice entered the room later that afternoon. It was not Marcus Thorne. It was a man with a greasy, nasally tone. My father introduced him as their family attorney. They were discussing dates and signatures. "If she signed this power of attorney 2 weeks ago, before the accident, it is perfectly legal," the lawyer said, the sound of papers shuffling filling the silence. "I just need a sample of her signature to trace. We can notarize it internally. No one will question it given her condition." "Do it," Richard said. "We need full control over the bank accounts and the company's stock by Monday morning." The final blow was not physical. It came when Richard leaned over the bed rails. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and feel the heat of his face near mine. He adjusted my blanket, not out of care, but to check for anything else of value he might have missed. He spoke to my mother, his voice low and devoid of any paternal warmth. "She is just a drain on resources now, Linda," he said. "Living like this, she only costs money. It is best we take all the assets before she finally dies." I woke up in the dead of night. My eyes snapped open, adjusting to the dim blue light of the monitors, and for the first time in weeks, my fingers obeyed my command to clench. The paralysis had lifted, leaving behind a body that felt like it had been run through a meat grinder. But it was mine again. I was about to call out for a nurse to announce my miraculous return. When I saw movement in the corner of the room, I instinctively squeezed my eyes shut, leaving only a microscopic slit to observe. It was Bella. She was standing in front of the small bathroom mirror, draping my emerald necklace around her neck, the one I had worn to the Met Gala. She posed, turning side to side, admiring her reflection with a sickening vanity. She was not mourning her sister. She was auditioning for my life. "Perfect," she whispered to herself. "This goes with the black dress." Dose. Over the next 3 days, I became a ghost in my own recovery. I maintained the facade of the coma, regulating my breathing even when rage threatened to make my heart monitor scream. I listened as Linda paced the room, speaking on her cell phone to a high-end real estate agent. "List the property for $18 million, Linda said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "We want a quick cash close, furniture included. We need the liquidity to handle medical expenses." She was selling my sanctuary, the home I had built to escape the world, and she was doing it to fund a lifestyle she had never earned. But the deepest cut came from Richard. I lay there, helpless, as he sat in the chair next to my bed and negotiated the destruction of my life's work. He was on a video call with the CEO of Origin's biggest rival. "We will accept $40 a share," Richard said. The market value was nearly double that. "We want the deal signed by Friday. You get the patents, we get the payout, and we wash our hands of the operational headaches." He was selling my legacy for pennies on the dollar just to get fast cash before I expired. My opportunity came on the 4th night. The night nurse, a young man who spent more time texting than checking vitals, left his smartphone on the bedside tray while he went to the restroom. The moment the door clicked shut, I moved. The pain was blinding, shooting up my spine like lightning. But I gritted my teeth and reached out, My hand trembled violently. It took me 3 agonizing attempts to grasp the device. I bypassed the lock screen. He had no passcode, a security flaw I would have normally lectured him on, and opened an encrypted messaging app. I typed a message to Marcus Thorne. My fingers were stiff, and I made typos. But the message was clear: I am awake. They are selling everything. Get me out of here. Do not tell anyone. I deleted the message log, wiped the screen with my sheet, and placed the phone back exactly where it was, just seconds before the toilet flushed. Marcus arrived 6 hours later at 4 in the morning. He was not alone. He walked in with the chief of neurology, Dr. Evans, a woman who had apparently harbored suspicions about my family's eagerness to pull the plug. The relief on Marcus's face when I opened my eyes and spoke his name was the first genuine emotion I had seen in weeks. "We are moving you," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "Doctor, Evans has arranged a transfer to a private rehabilitation wing under a pseudonym. Your family will be told you're undergoing a specialized, isolated procedure and cannot be visited for 72 hours. The extraction was seamless. By sunrise, I was in a secure room on the other side of the city. My physical rehabilitation began immediately, but my mental focus was entirely on the tablet Marcus placed in my hands. It contained the financial records from the last month. "They moved fast," Marcus said, his face grim. I scrolled through the transactions, my blood running cold. They had drained the emergency liquidity fund. $3 million wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under Richard's name. Another $500,000 spent on a deposit for a vacation home in Aspen for Bella. They had even maxed out the credit line against my stock options. "They did not just steal from me," I said, my voice raspy but steady. "They gutted me." I looked up at Marcus. The despair I had felt in the dark hospital room was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, mathematical precision. I was going to take it all back, and I was going to charge them interest. Marcus laid the timeline out on the coffee table of the safe house with the precision of a forensic pathologist. The evidence was damning in its simplicity. The power of attorney document my father had used to commandeer my life was dated October 15th. On that specific day, according to the hospital logs Marcus had subpoenaed, I was intubated and scoring a 3 on the Glasgow coma scale. I could not have signed a birthday card, let alone a complex legal instrument transferring full executive power. The signature was a forgery, traced from an old lease agreement I had signed 5 years ago, but they had been sloppy. The pen pressure was all wrong, shaky in places where my hand was naturally firm. We moved from the legal fraud to the financial carnage. The bank statements were a testament to their gluttony. In less than 3 weeks, they had burned through nearly $2 million of liquid cash. There was a wire transfer of $250,000 to a luxury dealership in Miami for a yellow Lamborghini Urus, registered to Bella. There was a $50,000 charge at a plastic surgery clinic, labeled as a consultation fee. They were not just spending my money, they were devouring it with the frenzied panic of people who knew their time was limited. Then came the piece of paper that turned my blood to ice. It was a preliminary report from the insurance investigator regarding the wreckage of my SUV. The brake lines had not failed due to wear and tear. The report noted distinct, serrated tool marks on the hydraulic line. The fluid had been draining slowly for miles until the pressure finally collapsed on that steep descent. This was not negligence. It was attempted murder. My parents and sister had not just taken advantage of a tragedy, they had engineered it. They had sat in the back seat, buckled in safe and sound, willing to risk a crash because they knew the driver me would take the brunt of the impact. "I have enough here to put them away for 20 years, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "I filed an emergency ex parte motion an hour ago. The judge granted a temporary freezing order on all your accounts, but I sealed the docket. As far as they know, the bank is just having technical difficulties." He was right. On the tablet, I watched a live feed of my father's attempts to transfer another $1 million. The transaction failed. A system error, contact administrator notification popped up. Richard simply refreshed the page, muttering about incompetent bank software. He was so blinded by arrogance that he did not even consider the possibility that I was fighting back. He assumed the universe was finally bending to his will. Because the transfers were failing, their desperation spiked. They moved up the timeline for the Origin sale. They called an emergency board meeting for 9 in the morning on Friday to force the vote. They needed the buyout money to hit their accounts before the banking glitches were resolved. "We can stop the meeting with a phone call," Marcus suggested. "The police can arrest them at the house." "No," I said, standing up. My leg throbbed, a sharp reminder of the metal pins holding my bone together, but I pushed through it. "If we arrest them at home, they will spin a story. They will cry to the press about a misunderstanding. I want them to hang themselves in public. I want the world to see them for exactly what they are." I spent the next 2 hours in front of the mirror, constructing my armor. My face was pale, gaunt from weeks of atrophy, but I painted over the weakness. I applied foundation to hide the bruising on my jaw. I contoured my cheekbones to look sharp, not emaciated. I put on a charcoal power suit that had been tailored for my TED Talk last year. It hid the back brace I still needed to stand upright. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see a victim. I saw the CEO of a billion-dollar company who had returned from the dead to collect a debt. "The team is in place," Marcus said, checking his watch. "I have 4 off-duty police officers and 2 forensic accountants waiting in the lobby. The Economic Crimes Division is on standby to execute the arrest warrants the moment you give the signal." I adjusted my lapels, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at my healing ribs. "Let us go," I said. "My family is waiting for me." I stood motionless in the hallway, my hand hovering inches from the brushed steel handle. The heavy oak doors were thick, designed to ensure privacy for billion-dollar deals, but they could not contain the volume of my father's arrogance. The voices inside were clear now, filtered through the expensive wood grain, and every word was a fresh nail driven into the coffin of my past affection for them. "I am the only legal voice Harper has left," Richard bellowed. I could imagine him slamming his fist on the mahogany table, a gesture he used whenever he felt his control slipping. "You have seen the medical reports. The girl is brain dead. She is never waking up to challenge this. I hold the power of attorney, and I am telling you to accept the offer. If you do not vote for the sale, I will sue this board for obstruction until you are all destitute." There was a murmur of dissent from the loyal faction of the board, the men and women who had built this company alongside me, but their voices were weak. They were cornered. They believed I was gone, and without me, they had no ammunition to fight back against a legal guardian. Then my mother spoke up. Her voice had shifted from the weeping martyr to the pragmatic conspirator, though she still coated her lies in a sickening layer of concern. "Please, you have to understand," Linda said, her tone dripping with false sincerity. "It breaks our hearts to do this, but Harper was in trouble. She had significant private debts, gambling debts. She was leveraged to the hilt on bad investments that none of you knew about. We need to liquidate the company immediately to pay off these dangerous people and protect her reputation. We are just trying to clean up her mess." My blood boiled. I had never placed a bet in my life. My finances were impeccable until they got their hands on them. She was inventing a scandal to justify their fire sale, trashing my name to ensure a quick payday. "Exactly," Bella chimed in, and her cruelty was the sharpest blade of all. I heard the clink of glass, suggesting she was pouring herself water or perhaps something stronger from the minibar. "Let us be real. My sister is a vegetable now. What does a vegetable need with a tech conglomerate? She needs a feeding tube and a sunny window, not stock options. Just sign the paper so we can get her the care she needs." She laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound that stripped me of my humanity and reduced me to a potted plant. "The young lady is right." A new voice rumbled. It was the buyer, a corporate raider named Vance, who had been trying to acquire Origin for 5 years. I had rejected his offers a dozen times. "Without Harper Sterling, this company is a headless chicken. $40 a share is a gift. I am taking a risk just buying the patents. Sign the deal, and you all walk away with your golden parachutes. Delay, and the stock goes to 0. The room fell silent. It was the silence of defeat. I could feel the hesitation of my board members, the heavy weight of the pens hovering over the contracts. They were about to sign away my life's work because they thought they had no choice. My phone vibrated against my hip. I pulled it out slowly. A single text message from Marcus Thorne illuminated the screen. All clear. Showtime. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath. The air in the hallway felt thin, or perhaps my lungs were just tight from the adrenaline. I adjusted the lapels of my charcoal suit, ensuring they lay flat. I checked my reflection in the glass panel of the fire extinguisher case. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning with a cold, hard fire. I ignored the screaming pain in my healing leg and the ache in my ribs. Pain was temporary. This moment was permanent. I looked at the 2 large security guards Marcus had stationed by the door. I gave them a curt nod. "Open it," I commanded. The guards stepped forward and threw the double doors open with a synchronized force that banged them against the interior walls. The sudden noise sounded like a gunshot. Bright, harsh light from the hallway flooded into the dimly lit boardroom, cutting through the gloom and blinding the conspirators huddled around the table. I stepped into the doorway, a silhouette framed by the light, ready to burn their world to the ground. I did not run. I could not run. My leg was still braced, forcing me into a slow, rhythmic limp, but I did not let it diminish me. I walked with my chin held high, channeling every ounce of fury into a posture of absolute dominance. I was no longer the invalid in the hospital bed. I was the CEO, and this was my boardroom. The silence that descended on the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating, sucking the oxygen out of the air. Richard was mid-sentence, his mouth open to bully a board member, but the words died in his throat. His hand went slack, and his expensive fountain pen slipped through his fingers, hitting the mahogany table with a sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Beside him, Linda turned a shade of white I had never seen on a living person. Her eyes bulged, and she clutched her chest as if her heart had simply stopped beating. But it was Bella who broke the silence. She let out a high-pitched, terrified shriek, the kind of sound one makes when seeing a corpse rise from the grave. She scrambled backward so frantically that her heels caught in the carpet, and she crashed to the floor, taking her leather executive chair down with her. She crab-walked backward on her hands and feet until her back hit the credenza, staring up at me with wide, panicked eyes. I stopped at the head of the table. I did not look at the board members. I did not look at the buyer. I locked eyes with my father and Dee's. "I heard you are planning to sell my company," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was freezing cold, slicing through the tension like a razor. Richard blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the reality standing in front of him. He stood up, his knees shaking so hard the table vibrated. "Harper, sweetheart, my God, you are awake. We were told," the doctors said. He swallowed hard, trying to switch masks, attempting to put on the concerned father face, but it slipped. "We are doing this for you, honey. We had to secure your future. We were just trying to save what was left." "Save what was left," I repeated. I reached into the satchel Marcus was holding and pulled out the thick stack of medical records and bank transfers. I threw the file onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, knocking over Richard's water glass before coming to rest right in front of him. "You mean save what was left for yourselves before I woke up to stop you." Marcus stepped forward, his voice booming with the authority of the law. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a court order issued 20 minutes ago by Judge Halloway. It declares the power of attorney held by Richard Sterling to be null and void, obtained through fraudulent means. It also freezes all assets associated with the Sterling family pending a criminal investigation into embezzlement and fraud." "Fraud!" Richard sputtered, his face turning purple. "I am her father. I have rights." "You have nothing," I cut him off. I took a step closer, leaning on the table to support my weight, bringing my face level with his. "Do not lie to me, Richard. Do not tell me you did this for love. I was there, in that hospital room. I could not move, and I could not speak, but I could hear every word. I let that sink in. I watched the realization dawn on him. I heard you, I continued, enunciating every syllable. I heard you tell Mom that I was a drain on resources. I heard you say, and I quote, "She only costs money alive. It is best to take the assets before she finally dies." That is what you said, isn't it? Linda let out a choked sob. She stood up, tears streaming down her face, and lunged toward me with open arms. No, no, Harper, you are confused. It was the trauma. We love you. We were just scared. She tried to embrace me, to wrap me in her poisonous affection, but she never made it. Two of my private security guards stepped in front of me, a wall of black suits and muscle. One of them caught Linda by the shoulders and pushed her back firmly. She stumbled, hitting the wall with a thud, gasping for air. The reality of the situation finally hit the rest of the room. Vance, the corporate raider who had been so eager to strip my company for parts, looked at the court order, then at the police officers visible through the glass walls of the hallway. He slammed his briefcase shut. I am out, Vance announced, standing up. I am withdrawing my offer immediately. I want no part of this mess. He pushed past the stunned board members and sprinted for the door. The other conspirators, the lawyers who had helped draft the fake documents, the consultants my parents had hired followed him in a stampede of self-preservation, leaving my family alone in the wreckage they had created. Marcus gave a sharp, decisive nod toward the open doorway. It was the signal the Economic Crimes Unit had been waiting for. 4 officers in tactical vests marched into the boardroom, their boots heavy on the plush carpet, instantly sucking the remaining air out of the room. They did not look like the friendly neighborhood beat cops. They looked like the hammer of justice coming down to crush a bug. One of the officers stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. He looked at my family with the dispassionate gaze of a man who had seen every variety of white-collar criminal. Richard Sterling, Linda Sterling, and Bella Sterling, he announced, his voice bouncing off the glass walls. You are under arrest for first-degree forgery, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and the financial exploitation of a physically incapacitated person. The reality of the situation shattered Bella's composure completely. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing so hard her shoulders heaved. It was not me, she wailed, pointing a shaking finger at our parents. I did not sign anything. It was Dad's idea. Mom told me it was okay to use the credit cards. Please, I just did what they told me. It was pathetic. The sister who had mocked my vegetative state just minutes ago was now throwing her own flesh and blood to the wolves to save her own skin. Linda just stood there, paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as the officer pulled her wrist behind her back. Richard, however, was not going down quietly. As the officer grabbed his arm to cuff him, he twisted around, his face purple with rage. He looked at me, his eyes bulging with a toxic mix of entitlement and hatred. You ungrateful little wretch, he shouted, straining against the officer's grip. Is this how you repay us? We are your parents. We gave you life. You think you can do this to me? I am the only reason you exist. I let out a short, dry laugh. It was a cold sound. I walked around the table until I was standing just inches from him, safely out of his reach, but close enough to see the sweat beading on his upper lip. Do you remember the phone call, Dad? I asked softly. The one you made the day the Forbes article came out. You told me, we have always been proud of you. You said you loved me. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of 10 years of neglect. You are not proud of me, I said. You are hungry for my money. You looked at me and saw a bank account with a pulse, and now you are going to have neither. The officer tightened the cuffs on Richard's wrists, the metal clicking shut with a finality that echoed through the room. Let us go, the officer commanded. They were marched out of the boardroom in a single file line. The entire office floor had ground to a halt. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, Hundreds of my employees, analysts, researchers, and interns stood in silence, watching the spectacle. They saw the great Richard Sterling, the man who had walked in here, claiming to be king, being dragged out like a common thief. Bella was hyperventilating, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, while Linda kept her head down, unable to meet the gaze of the people she had tried to fire just days ago. I stood by the table and watched them disappear into the elevator. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the pang of guilt, the familial pull, the sadness of losing the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But nothing came. My chest felt lighter than it had in a decade. The anchor that had been dragging me down since I was 22 years old had finally been cut loose. I turned back to the boardroom table. The remaining board members looked terrified, unsure if my wrath would extend to them. "Gentlemen," I said, smoothing the front of my jacket. "Apologies for the interruption. Origin is not for sale. We have a product launch next month, and I expect everyone to be focused on that. The company is stable. I am back. Meeting adjourned." As the board members scrambled to leave, Marcus stepped up beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of genuine support. "You did good, Harper," he said, "but this is just the financial fraud charges. The forensic report on your car's brake line is being transferred to the district attorney's homicide division this afternoon. Once they match the tool marks to the tools in your father's garage, we will be adding 3 counts of attempted murder to the indictment." I looked at the empty doorway where my family had just exited. "Good," I said. "Make sure they never hurt anyone ever again." It has been 6 months since the gavel slammed down in the courtroom, sealing the fate of the people who gave me life and then tried to steal it. The justice system moves slowly, but when it finally landed on Richard and Linda, it crushed them. They were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. The evidence regarding the tampered brakes was circumstantial enough to avoid a definitive attempted murder conviction, but the financial crimes were undeniable. Bella, true to her nature, cut a deal to save herself. She received 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. She is currently picking up trash on the side of the highway, which feels like a poetic justice for someone who treated me like garbage for 30 years. I sold the villa overlooking the ocean. I could not spend another night in a house where my mother had plotted my demise over afternoon tea. I moved into a penthouse in the city center, a fortress of glass and steel with biometric security and a view that stretches to the horizon. It is modern, stark, and safe. Most importantly, it is entirely mine. There are no guest rooms for ungrateful relatives here. Origin did not collapse as the analysts predicted. In fact, after I went public with the entire truth, refusing to hide behind vague public relations statements, our stock price tripled. The world loves a survivor, and I became more than just a tech CEO. I became a symbol of resilience. But the work that means the most to me now is not in the boardroom. I established the Sterling Shield Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to young adults suffering from familial financial abuse. I am using the very fortune my parents tried to steal to protect others from people exactly like them. I have learned a hard lesson about the definition of family. It is not defined by whose DNA you carry or whose name is on your birth certificate. Family are the people who stand beside you when you are paralyzed in a hospital bed and have nothing to offer but your breath. Family is Marcus, who risked his career to save me. Family is the loyal staff who refused to sign the transfer papers. Family are the friends who visited me in rehab when I could barely walk. I have cut the cancer out of my life, and for the first time, I am truly healing. Tonight, I stood on my balcony, holding the copy of that cursed Forbes magazine. The face on the cover was mine, but the eyes looked naive, desperate for validation. I held a lighter to the corner of the glossy paper. I watched the orange flames curl around the edges, turning the headline New Tech Queen into gray ash. It was a cleansing fire. I dropped the burning remnants into a metal bin and watched them fade, just like my need for their approval. The wind whipped through my hair as I looked out over the glittering city lights, feeling a sense of freedom that was intoxicating. My phone buzzed on the railing, breaking the silence. The screen lit up with a notification. No caller ID. It was a collect call from a state correctional facility. I stared at the screen for a long moment. 6 months ago, the old Harper would have answered. She would have begged for an explanation. She would have looked for an apology or a shred of regret. But the Harper who needed them died in that car crash on the mountain. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile, and pressed the block button without a single second of hesitation. They called me with words I will never forget. But today, I pay them back with eternal silence. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Harper's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mira Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.